evil lurks in the hearts of men. The shadow knows.
Welcome. Once again, we turn to the stories of Ray Bradbury. This one is entitled The Crowd. After the accident, the crowd gathered swiftly, a ring of faces looking down at Spallner, stirring, shifting, gaping. Where they all came from he did not know. He had heard their hard heels clattering over the asphalt of the street, heard their shouts and tiny squeals and curses as they saw the new motor car crumpled against the brick wall. Blood was trickling from a gash in his brow. It swam across his face and he had trouble breathing, and yet he was strangely calm. He couldn't understand why. He should be afraid of dying, but death was farthest from his thoughts. He was looking at the crowd that bent over him, a good 24 people. Jammed one in back of the other, looking down, looking down. There was something in the expression on their faces. He could tell that he wouldn't die. He could tell by their expressions. Someone far back said, "Is he dead?" Someone else replied, "No, he's not dead. He's not going to die. He'll be all right." Naturally, of course he wasn't going to die. They wouldn't let him. He could read it in their faces that he would be all right. The wheels of the car turned up to the sky, were still spinning dizzily. He heard them whirring slowly. There was something about the wheels, too. Something. Gasoline crawled on the asphalt, mixed with blood. Feet moved. "All right, break it up there, break it up!" A thick Irish voice shouted its way through the crowd. Blue serge legs appeared. A red Irish face peered down. "You okay, son?" Spallner nodded his head weakly. "I'll be all right." A swallowing pause. "Ambulance?" "Be here any minute now. You just take it easy." Spallner did take it easy. He rested back against a coat someone had thoughtfully slipped under his head. He had time to listen and look and smell. He looked at the faces, a cordon of questioning, shifting faces. What sort of people were they? Where were they from? What did they do? He examined each one. First a man's face, thin, bright, alert, and pale, staring at him, continually swallowing and wetting his lips as if he were hypnotized. Beside him, a small-boned woman with red hair and too much powder on her face. She was a calcimined wren, with a high, hysterical voice. She wrung a handkerchief with her thin fingers. Behind the officer, a little boy with freckles wavered, tears streaming down his ruddy cheeks. He was barefooted, his eyes were scrounged up tight, and he kept opening them and blinking and then closing them again. A siren split the night wide open at the seams. The crowd craned its neck as if it were all on a marionette string, activated by one silent will. A sort of fear raced through Spallner then. The crowd twisted back to gaze at him. Faces. There was something suggestive about them, something he could not quite catch with his mind. What was it? Other faces, an old man with a face like a bleached apricot, bald and whimpering in his throat. A young woman whose hands were twitching all by themselves at her sides, as if they did not belong to her. A high school student, pimple-faced, who kept drawing back from the blood, but always returned, curious, to look again. He couldn't help himself. Where had they all come from? So strange, thought Spallner, how a crowd gathers after an accident. Instantly, with the speed of mercury, they materialized. Young, old, glib, sour, and frightened and calm. They came running for blocks, out of side streets, and out of alleys, and out of houses and hotels, and out of cabs and streetcars and buses. They came quickly. It was impossible that so many people could gather in one place at once. They came as to the call of Gabriel. The ambulance shrieked up, and the siren bubbled to a moan, then into silence. White uniforms took the plunge into the throng, wedging a trail through a carrier. "What is it?" The officer told them. The crowd watched and listened. Effectively, the interns shifted Spallner onto the carrier, hoisted him, and slid him into the ambulance. One of the interns hopped in, slammed the doors shut. Through the square glass windows, a few faces in the crowd still stared. There was something wrong with the crowd, something far worse than what had happened to Spallner. He felt uneasiness in his stomach. Engines roared to life. The ambulance started. It pulled away from the curb, from the crumpled wreck, the blood and gas, away from the crowd. The crowd that always came too fast, so strangely fast, to form a circle. A circle, a ring of vultures? Blackness enveloped Spallner. It clipped off everything. He saw the wheels spinning in his brain as he came to his senses. One wheel, four wheels, spinning, spinning, and whirring in a relentlessly whining song, around and around and around again. He knew it was wrong. Something wrong with the wheels and the whole scene and the setup. A vague wrongness which he could not quite fathom. But the auto wheels spun, his brain spun with them, and the faces of the crowd hurtled in a mad dervish fashion at the core of the wheels. Out of the spiraling nebula came sunlight. A doctor, his voice, his quiet, gentle face, and thin, warm hand taking Spallner's pulse. Things cleared into crystal sharpness. Spallner discovered the hospital room, with its exact germicidal odor, and the nurse standing behind the doctor. "There you are," the doctor said, as Spallner's eyes fluttered open. "How do you feel?" The wheels had rolled away, taking the crowd and the nausea with them. Spallner tried a weak smile. "Fine, I guess." His head was bandaged. Everything else was intact under cover. "I'm Dr. Melchior." "Something's wrong, Doctor. Something's wrong." "I should say so. The accident—" No, I'm trying to think." Spallner lifted himself from the pillow, only to be gently pressed back by Melchior's hands. "You can think just as well lying down, Mr. Spallner. Now tell me, what's wrong? Something about the accident?" "In a way. Something about a wheel and a crowd." Spallner shook his head and winced. "Don't mind me, I'm crazy." He bit his lips and looked at the physician. "If I tell you something, will you promise not to commit me to an insane asylum?" "I promise. What is it?" Spallner had to force it out. He seemed embarrassed. "It was the crowd, Dr. Melchior. The crowd last night. I didn't like it." Days of sunshine followed, 5 of them. Dr. Melchior told him his stay at the hospital was almost over. "You're lucky, Mr. Spallner, if that gash in your brow had been 1/8 of an inch deeper." "There's something I'd like to know. Accidents do things to people, don't they?" "What sort of things?" "Up here," replied Spallner. He touched his head. Doesn't it wreck your time sense?" "Sometimes. It all depends. 1 minute seems like an hour, or maybe an hour seems like a minute, right?" The physician nodded. "Panic often does that." "Well, here's how it was. I was driving down a perfectly deserted street, hitting about 60, when the blowout, and I jumped the curb, hit the wall. It was pretty awful. I was shocked, I know, but I still remember a lot of things. Mostly the crowd. It got there too quick, Doctor. The crowd got there too quick. About 30 seconds after the smash, they were all there, standing over me and staring at me, and it's not right that they should have run that fast so late at night." Clearing his throat, Melchior raised his hands. "You can answer your own problem. Your senses temporarily warped also through a bend into time. What you thought was 20 seconds was in reality maybe 5 or 6 minutes. That's a normal time for a crowd to gather." Spallner fell silent. In his mind he saw the crowd again, and the wheels, all of them, spinning around. He jerked. "Doctor, I've got it, I know. It's impossible to twist the order of things completely if I was conscious all the way through, and I was. I remember the wheels of the car. They were still spinning when the crowd got there. They were still spinning." Melchior said nothing, but frowned. "I'm positive of that," exclaimed Spallner. "The wheels were spinning, and spinning fast. You know yourself that the wheels of a car at a certain angle won't spin fast for very long. Friction had cut it down immediately." That's what it is, I swear it. I saw them bending over me, and I heard the wheels singing around and around, and I looked and I saw them. The physician rose quietly and stood over his patient. I've seen patients like you before. You're reshuffling your memories to fit a pattern you thought up. You want them to fit the pattern, and they do. You need a few more sedatives, young man. And later, when you get out of the hospital, try and visit a psychiatrist. He'll help you weed out your mind. The street was empty, Dr. Melchior, not a soul in sight. And there's one other thing. It was the look on the crowd's faces. Something told me I wouldn't die. You're suffering from shock, said Melchior. Released from the hospital, the first thing Spallner did was call a taxi. I'm recovering from an accident, he told the driver. If I don't ride in now and ride fast, I'll never drive again. Take me home at nothing under 40. He climbed into the taxi and they were off. He was afraid at first. Calmness and confidence returned slowly as they hurtled homeward. And he finally began to worry about the night of the accident, about the wheels and the crowd. Halfway home, traffic thickened. The cabbie twisted his chunky slab of face around and growled, "Shall I detour? Looks like a wreck up ahead." "Yes, detour. No, on the other hand, cabbie, pull ahead. Let's take a look." The cabbie grunted. "Okay, sure do, if it's blood you want." The taxi weaved in and out among the parked cars. Sirens were wailing. Police cars drove up. "Los Angeles is one hell of a town to drive in," snorted the cabbie. He honked his horn, angled out the window, yelling, "Get that flea trap out of the way! Clunk, get going!" The cab swerved into a notch and idled. "Have to hold it a sec," explained the cabbie. He turned, wiping his brow. "Funny, ain't it, how a crowd gathers when there's an accident?" Spallner started. He saw his fingers tremble on his knee. They looked at the cabbie and said, "Have you noticed that too?" Cabbie nodded profoundly. "Sure. If no matter what happens, a babe pulls a feint on the corner of Wilshire and Labrie, and in 5 minutes you got a mob big enough they need a convention permit." The cabbie snorted. "Bunch of morbid guys. What do they call them? Sadists? Maybe they got curious, I don't know. Anyway, they come running as if they was their own relative got beamed. It's crazy." Spallner sat very quietly, digesting all of this. It was a fact. It could be corroborated at any accident. A fire or a wreck or an explosion, people appeared as if by magic, and it all seemed a bit fantastic. Gingerly, Spallner advanced the subject a step further. "Ever seen an accident late at night?" "Yeah, don't make no difference, though. There's always a crowd." With that, the cabbie shifted gears and plowed out around a streetcar. The wreck came into view, 2 cars interlocked smashingly, fenders severed and gashed. Both of them snarled into the cow catcher of a streetcar. The body lay on a sidewalk. You knew there was a body there, even if you couldn't see it, because of the crowd. The crowd with its back towards Spallner, with its back towards him. Spallner opened the window and almost started to yell, but he didn't have the nerve. He didn't have the nerve. He was afraid to see their faces. At the dinner table alone, Spallner took another glass of port and pulled it down. His butler came in and cleared away the dishes, pausing at the door, watching Spallner take his 4th glass. He cleared his throat warningly. Spallner laughed. "It's all right, Mac. I'll stay sober." "But, sir, so soon after the hospital. I need it." "Yes, sir. Anything else?" "Yes, there is, Mac. I've got a hunch. I want some newspapers, a lot of them. Buy every paper printed recently." "How far back shall I go, sir?" "Buy 1 paper every other week for the last 2 years, and buy all the papers for last month." Spallner poured more wine. "I'm going to the office for a brief checkup. I'll drop you at the newspaper plant and pick you up later." "May I ask what you want these papers for, sir?" "What for?" Spallner put the wine to his lips and savored it. I'm looking up some pictures of some old friends." "Yes, that's it. Some old friends."